Welcome to Dyed Green. I'm Max Sussman.
And I'm Kate McCabe.
Well, we are really excited to be back with you. It's been far too long. We haven't been counting the months, but it's been at least months since we've released an episode. But we're back into it. We've got a lot of exciting shows lined up for you and some changes to talk about.
Our first change is that we are now hosted on Substack. And the best way to find us is to go to dyedgreen.com, where you will be able to access all of our current and past shows.
Yeah, so if you have subscribed or follow us on any of your favorite podcast listening devices like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you shouldn't see any changes. But now, like Kate said, to go check out the archives, you can go to dyedgreen.com. And another really cool thing is that, Kate, you've been doing a lot of writing on your Substack, right?
I have. We have created a Substack for Bog and Thunder that is listed under my name, katemccabe.substack.com, which we have envisioned as a home or an online hub for people that are interested in Ireland, in Irish food, experiences, literature, as a way for folks that are either interested or come on an experience with us and want to stay connected to have a place online to connect. So our podcast will live on the Substack. We have weekly newsletters, and we will also be debuting some Zoom conversations and some other opportunities through there.
Yeah. What's it called?
It is called Sunwise.
All right, little teaser. So let's hit him with that URL one more time for the Substack so people know where to find your amazing
katemccabe.substack.com.
I think it's great.
Thank you.
So check out the Substack. That's where everything's going to live. But if you get lost, you can always go to dyedgreen.com in a pinch.
Or bogandthunder.com.
Yeah, we'll just keep we're just going to keep gaining websites.
We're just going to keep giving you websites.
Adding websites for you to just visit on a regular basis. But without further ado, we'd love to introduce this week's episode, our first episode in a while.
Yes, and our guest on our 41st episode of Dyed Green is Chef Paula McIntyre. Paula is a chef, a writer, and a broadcaster, as well as the director of Slow Food Northern Ireland, and she's based in Portstewart in County Derry. I wrote about the first time that I met Paula in person on the most recent post on our Bog and Thunder's Substack, which is called Sunwise. And as it happened, I was in Rome for the Parma Forum, and I met up with Paula and some other chefs and artisans from Ireland at a market where I had some of the most delicious pizza I've ever had in my life. And at the moment where I met Paula, I was actually eating the pizza and crying because that's how delicious it was. So
you were crying yummy tears?
I was crying happy tears. I think probably more than happy tears. But I do think that it's really interesting that that experience became a food memory to me. So I will always remember that slice of pizza in the Testaccio market in Rome, but I will also remember, crying when I met this group of Irish women, chefs and artisans in that market while I was eating a piece of pizza. And on today's episode with Paula, we talk about some of her food memories and what inspired her to become a chef.
It's never too late to
become
create
a chef.
A new core memory.
No, that's true. That's true.
Never too late in life. I loved talking to Paula.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I loved this conversation. She's a real hoot. Let's just put it that way. A lot of fun to talk to. But one of the things that I was thinking about during our conversation was how much love she has for the craft and art of cooking. And as someone who's been a chef my whole life and who cooks now for a family, like sometimes it can be really hard to actually just embrace the craft itself of cooking in a sort of more slow and deliberate and enjoyable sort of way. Sometimes I feel like I'm always rushing to complete a cooking task and trying to go as fast as possible from like, oh, I have to make something for dinner to it's dinner time. And just talking to her reminded me that cooking is really enjoyable and it's fun to take your time. And sometimes it's fun to start like a weird, giant, wacky project that takes a long time to finish. And it's not always about how fast can you prep this, how fast can you have dinner on the table. Like sometimes it's better to like slow cook, slow food, cook, all that stuff. Like,
Well, and also Paula talks a lot about, we talk about this sort of more modern tendency for chefs to fuck with ingredients and to think the more things that you can turn stuff into, make it look different, cut apart and put back together in different ways actually just takes you further away from that.
Yeah.
The pleasure of eating something that is grown in healthy soil with care by farmers and then really just very, very, very simply cooked.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Keep it tuned to the dial here on dyedgreen.com. Stay tuned for the interview with Paula. And here it is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Dyed Green, Paula. It's great to see you again.
Oh, listen, my pleasure. Absolutely.
It was really great to be able to meet you in person in Rome, of all places.
I know.
I told Max the story about how we met like right after I had bought this incredible pizza, which I think was the best thing that I ate while I was there.
Yes.
And I was like I almost started crying when I ate it.
I think we were all trying to
Yeah.
So that's the thing. There was an awful lot of food envy going there over there, wasn't there?
I even heard about the pizza thousands of miles away, and I had food envy as well.
Yeah, well, I think your ears were probably burning as well because we were talking about you and when you were eating when Kate was eating the pizza. So
I did tell him. I did confess.
yeah.
I was shocked.
That's a story.
I was shocked.
Yeah, so it's great to have you on our show, and I think that there are a number of places that we could start. You've had a really incredible, diverse career, so I'm excited to ask you about all different parts of that. But I was wondering if maybe we could start from the beginning and talk about where your love of food was born from and what inspired you.
There's a couple of things. First of all, I grew up in quite a rural area, surrounded by really good food, but I mean simple food. So we're talking Ireland in the 1970s. God, am I so old? But anyway, and in a very sort of very rural, in the middle of the country, nearest town 7 miles away, but really surrounded by good food, like really good spots, brilliant meat, great lamb, vegetables, dairy. We at the time, whenever I was growing up, if you wanted cream, you just went down to the local creamery and got like a glass jar of it. And also, my mother was quite an adventurous cook, and we had friends that moved to Edinburgh when I was 8, and they'd moved maybe about a fortnight, and we went over to visit them. God love them. So we arrived in Edinburgh, and Nora, the family friend, was an amazing cook. And I remember her taking me to Volvona and Crolla, Italian deli, and that was my first exposure to real Italian food. So I'm 8 years old, coming from spuds and beef in Ireland, and to see these big Parma hams hanging. And I remember somebody slicing a bit of Parmesan cheese, and I put it into my mouth, and I'd never tasted anything like it in my life. And I thought, dear God, this is, just that taste. I can still, and the sensation, which must have been absolutely like unbelievable to an 8-year-old palate to taste, Parmesan. And then I maybe fast forward about 4 years and people were starting to eat Parmesan in Northern Ireland. And they said, "Oh, do you want some parmesan in your pasta?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, right, okay." And it was that ambient crap. And I remember nearly dying, thinking, "No, God, no, that isn't Jesus. It tastes like vomit," And but so I suppose that there was that side of so that I think Balvona and Crawla was a real inspiration to me, because I thought, God, that's real food. And then around that time when I moved home, or when I were back home, friends of the family opened a restaurant next door to us, but they were big travelers. Margaret had been an archaeologist. Joey had been a teacher. They met up. It was her family home, and there was a cellar, and they opened a restaurant in it. And really, in those days, they made a curry. Now, this is a time where if you wanted a curry, it came in a dehydrated in a box, and you added water to it. So they went to London, got all the spices, brought it back, toasted spices, ground them up by hand, made this amazing curry. And then they had things, again, seasonal things like pheasant and grouse. And I remember you got a massive Stilton, and and scooped it out at the table. And I mean, it was a very, very popular restaurant. And I started working in that when I was 14. And that was me completely hooked. And from then on, I just wanted to be involved in restaurants. I wanted to be involved in food. So that was it.
I love that story. Our son's 8 years old, and he's definitely had good Parmesan before, but we were in an Italian market around here, and they had a few little pieces out for sample, and it was the really good stuff, the really good, they probably just broke into the wheel, and it was and he took a bite, and he got like really quiet, and he was like, what is this? What is this? This is so good. So I think there's something, maybe he'll have a look back on that moment.
I still get like that, Max, about Parmesan.
Yeah.
I still have that feeling especially when, if you're privy to, unlucky enough to be at the opening of a wheel, and you get that first bite, and nothing would make me as quiet as that, to be honest.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Same for our son.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Whether now you know how to discipline him.
Yeah. Oh, good idea.
Really good Parmesan. Really good Parmesan.
Yeah.
So that was it. I mean, I sort of made up my mind that I wanted to go into cooking, but my parents were both teachers, and they did not want me to go into cooking. And it was a completely different vibe to the whole thing back then, I suppose the 80s. And I remember sort of telling them I wanted to be a cook, and they're like, no, because you just didn't do it in those days. And I think that I had to sort of fight a wee bit to follow what I wanted to do. And it was so, in many ways, it was looked down on. It wasn't considered a profession. And then women in those days wore coats, the whole big long coat, and you put an apron on, you put a wee flat hat, and you went to work in a school. And that's what you did. So I had decided quite early on that I wanted to work in proper restaurants, which was quite hard. There weren't too many women in restaurants in those days. But I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I did a course in Belfast, and half the course she did in college and half the course she did out in industry. And I worked in a restaurant called the Ramore, still there. But in those days, it was a restaurant upstairs and a wine bar downstairs, which for 1983 Northern Ireland was pretty hot. And George, the chef, he'd been working in Tons in London, he'd been working in the Ivy, he'd been working in Caprice. So he came back with all these brilliant ideas, and it was just an amazing time to be there. There were still boats coming into the harbour, so that's where I learned how to butcher fish, because, in those days, actually, monkfish was used as bait or just thrown back in again. And everybody was talking about this restaurant that they actually used the monkfish. They actually used them, So that was a really good opener for me. For about 2 years, I worked there, and I did placements in it, but I worked at the weekends and everything as well. And it was a case of, there weren't that many of us in the kitchen, and George, the chef, the owner, was really patient, and he used to say to me, "Oh, what are you doing in college on Monday?" And I'm like, "Well, I think we're doing noisette of lamb." So he would get racks of lamb and show me how to do it. That would be the special on the Saturday night. I'm going into college on a Monday morning, knowing ahead of the game exactly what to do. So I was always one step ahead. And I think that's something you need to do in your life, isn't it? Always sort of keep ahead. And the one thing that I love about cooking, and you'll appreciate this too, that everything changes. When I look at the way food was 10 years ago, it's completely changed. And the worst thing you can do is sort of sit there and stagnate, which I do see chefs doing and not, whereas I love to go to other restaurants. I love like in my in the kitchen now. I've got the last end of the season of Jerusalem artichokes. I've got turnip tops, which are really, really hard to get here in Northern Ireland, but I've just found a grower, an organic grower that grows fennel tops, and you can't imagine how excited I am about that. Because every time I go to Italy, I go to this restaurant in the mountains, and the first thing I do is order turnip tops. I just sit there and eat a big plate of them, that have been with
Mm-hmm.
the garlic and the oil. So that's dinner tonight. I've got a ragu on Italian sausage, and I might make some pasta because I've got some egg
Mm.
yolks in the fridge, and so it's all, and that's what I love now is everything's sort of seasonally driven. And I guess I was always the way that I was brought up was everything was
Yeah, I was going to
seasonal.
comment on that.
You
Just
didn't,
you mentioned everything, how everything's always changing, and you know, I guess thinking about how food in restaurants have changed since the 80s and 90s, we're talking about the rise of
yeah,
like the molecular gastronomy and all that, and then kind of
yeah,
coming back full circle to being more interested in seasonality and uh,
Nourishment.
yeah, nourishment, the careful sourcing, which I think things
yeah,
moved away from for a while in the 2000s. So it's kind of interesting to see that. I'm sure you have an interesting opinion on how
yeah.
that's kind of come
It
in a
was,
lot of ways full circle.
I think, one, right around the sort of late 90s through the 2000s, it was more about the aesthetic. It was more how it looked, and not about the taste. So it's now when I look at when I go to restaurants, the restaurants that excite me are actually real. The food is some simple, like Manteca in London and St John, and um, even Noble Rot to a certain extent, because it's all very simple. It's quite simple, but it's ingredient driven and seasonally driven, and I get very excited about bitter Italian greens. And maybe it's because we don't have as much exposure to them here, but I love that. I love fresh pasta. I love those sauces that aren't big, thick sauces. It's just like just coating vegetables, and you get maybe some nice berlotti beans and a lovely shaving of parmesan. But again, the parmesan's going to be a really good parmesan, like red cow parmesan is something that I spend a lot of money on. So I will forego shoes and clothes to have red cow parmesan. So, and to get it into Northern Ireland is quite a
Hmm.
feat. It's probably not a legal feat, but I get it here. And, so and I think there's things, but I think there is that simplicity, isn't there now? Maybe going back to that a bit. I know there's still, I think it's with age as well. When you're young, you want to throw all your skills and everything onto the plate. And as you get older, it's let the ingredients do that. And I mean, people like I do some catering, not an awful lot of catering, but if you're doing like a really nice pie, and like a guy I did a bit of catering for last year, and I mean, he could have had whatever he wanted in the world. I mean, this guy has his own sommelier, which is the dream. Who cares about a private jet? You have your own sommelier traveling around with you. But he wanted a fillet of moily beef done on the green egg with Queen's potatoes and a pie made of feather blade of beef, of the moily beef, in a really lovely flaky pastry that I used half butter and half leaf lard for. So that was in the middle of the table. I did a nice garnish with some baby turnips and things like that on the plate. Really good sauce that had boiled for or simmered for 48 hours. And then this bit of fillet from the green egg. And then queens that I had to get from Wexford, cost a clean fortune because they weren't ready up here yet. And you sort of think, I thought, God, that is the kind of thing I want to
Yeah,
sit down
yeah.
to. Because there was a lot of work in that, there was a lot of work. And I do a seasoning that has got kelp and porcini mushroom, dried mushroom, and black garlic and and really good sea salt, and I roll the fillet in that, just a bit of oil, and cook it like that. So you get this lovely umami crust onto it. A nice slice of that, some really, really good sauce, a nice big slice of, buttery pastry and encased feather beef. To me, that's nothing nicer,
really good.
Wow, yeah.
Really.
And a simply boiled queen, just tossing a bit of Abernethy dulse butter at the end. That's,
I remember
yeah.
Kate and I both
So,
used to help. We used to volunteer, or I don't know if it was work or volunteer, but at this organic farm near here. And I remember sitting down to lunch, and they just basically had like different kinds of boiled vegetables from the farm, and it was so good. Like everything was just fresh picked, hadn't really even gone into the cooler at all, and it was just...
not when you say boiled, maybe like more like flashed.
I just mean they was like really simple, and
Yeah.
I remember the potatoes because they were just boiled potatoes with butter and some herbs, and I was like, what is happening here? This is so good, and it's just really good, fresh.
I think that it's to go back again to what we were talking about earlier about the source of everything. And if you have, beautifully grown vegetables as they're meant to be with care. And you don't really want to vacuum pack them in their own juice and cook them at 80 degrees and compress them. Because really, what are you going to get at the end of it that you wouldn't have got just by boiling them and then having them with them? And I think that's the thing. I think we're always trying to do things that are really sort of a wee bit way out there, and really just forget about that, because actually it's a waste of bloody time.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time, because you're not going to come back. You're not going to end up with anything in 3 hours that you wouldn't have ended up with in 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's like who are you trying to impress? Like yourself, your staff, like what's actually happening there,
Yeah, or maybe it's just a bit of showing off, and it's actually not really, you're trying to, there's maybe a wee bit of a chip on the shoulder and think, oh, I have to show off here, rather than just have that. When you look at the really good cooks, it's all about simplicity, isn't it? Yeah, I agree entirely with that. Just, I want to go to that farm now.
Oh, yeah.
I have to visit.
Just sit there in the middle of a field with a wok.
Well, it's so true. Yeah.
Another thing, and I love to barbecue, and I'm, I think that whole thing, like last night, a friend of mine, I think you met her actually, Kate Leona, and she and her husband are cereal growers, when they produce a really nice rapeseed oil, but they've also started to grow carrots. So she brought me over a load of them there for an event I was doing last week. And yesterday, I just sort of blanched them in a bit of water with some sea salt, and then just brushed them with a bit of oil and finished them off on the barbecue. And they were stunning, just to sort of highlight that sweetness in the carrot, when you grill things. And I think grilled greens are a thing that, that I love as well. Just stick them straight onto the barbecue with a small amount of oil, and it just changes the flavour of them completely. Leeks is another thing. I'm a real big fan of blackening leeks on the outside, and then just opening them up, and you get that really beautiful sweet leek. We have a leek up here called a soup leek, which is just like a really, really thin leek, but it is so sweet. And everybody, basically older people, buy them and chop them up and put them into a broth with barley, and you're kind of killing them, because you're cooking them for about an hour. Whereas if you just split them and wash them and brush them with a bit of oil and straight onto the barbecue, and that combination of that beautiful onionness from the leek, and if that's a word, and the sweetness of that is just beautiful.
I feel like this is like the hungriest I've gotten in any interview that we've ever done. Like, oh man,
I'm thinking about I'm thinking about the turnip pots next door in the kitchen.
I'm like, well,
I can like smell the ragu simmering in your kitchen right now. Yeah.
It is.
And I'm thinking of like leeks. Like grilled leeks with like a romesco sauce is really good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But that's the thing, isn't it? Or just, the French do the leek vinaigrette, and there's not. It's just when you warm leeks and hit them with a really well-made vinaigrette with good oil, mustard, really good vinegar. Again, it's about buying good vinegar as well and good oil. And I mean, there's so many ways of sourcing that now. Crowd farming's a great thing we have, and the European thing, just where you can source your lemons, and you're helping out farms, and I think that's a really good thing.
I'm curious, just kind of taking it back to, you were talking about how when you grew up, you remember being able to go down and get the cream, the fresh cream. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen the food quality change since you grew up. Is it now it's kind of, well, I don't know, maybe it's easier, maybe it's harder. Has it gone through a shift in how it's easy to find good quality ingredients? Obviously, there have been a lot of changes, with the EU, with Brexit, with industrialization. And so, yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about where we are now on that note.
Yeah, I mean, so whenever I was growing up, actually, we would have had a situation where you would have had, you would have had small dairies, and I think that's something that's not really the case now. It's massive dairies. It's become really industrialized. But I do remember, communities that would have churned the milk to make butter, and then you get this buttermilk that's kind of grey in color. It's got these wee flecks of gold in it, whereas now buttermilk is really quite foamy and white. So, and I think with me, what I've seen is that with dairy products, and also the other thing from a more positive point of view. So we have that whole thing where everything's become industrialized, but what we have now and I think in Ireland as a whole, is cheese making. I mean, Ireland is not a traditional, we wouldn't have been traditionally cheese makers, we would have been butter makers. But you have these people coming in in the 1960s, Austrians and Germans, and coming over and showing Irish people how to make cheese. And, especially the raw milk cheeses. In the north now, we have a couple of really good, we've got one raw milk producer, Mike Thompson with his young buck. But, I'd love to see more. We've got more raw milk producers, but it's just so hard. And you talk about industrialization, and yes, industrialization has kind of wiped out. But then when somebody wants to has wiped out that small dairy, mentality. And then you have, if somebody like Mike Thompson really had to fight to produce a raw milk cheese, but that's the way we should be eating. And everything was against him, environmental health, everything was against him. But he stuck by his guns. And I mean, Mike's cheese, I mean, you see it in restaurants, we see it in menus in London now. It's popular throughout Ireland. I mean, I know Jess Murphy goes through a hell of a lot of it. So, I mean, she's been one of his biggest advocates. So I think from what I've seen is that, but then, in regards to vegetables, I mean, there's nothing has changed in the production of potatoes or from the way I source it. So I go to a farm, right, direct to the farm, and buy a big bag of spuds. That was the way I did it when I was young. So you can go to the supermarket and you can buy super bleached, washed spuds that they then roll in bloody peat. Why do they do that? Why would you wash something and then roll it in dried peat? Whereas I can go to the people that I get my veg from. Everything's still caked in muck. So I get like nice big carrots, I get beetroots, I get those soup leeks. None of them are washed, and that's the way it should be. Vegetables keep better when they're not washed. And the potatoes as well. I can go there every week. They have these sort of heritage varieties, like Aran Victories. They've got Dunbar Standards, Sharps Express, Golden Wonders. And every week I go, oh, what kind of spud will I have this week? And they're like, well, those are particularly good this week. Or, the Sharps Express, they're digging really well at the moment. And I'm paying $2.50 for 5 kilo of spuds. Yeah. That's not been affected by Brexit, so I think Brexit sometimes has been an excuse for putting up price. I'm not saying it hasn't been, but I'm not saying everybody, but the big supermarkets are using it as an excuse. Smaller growers aren't. Because I came away today with half a kilo of turnip tops, half a kilo of Russian kale, and a kilo of Jerusalem artichokes for £10. all organically grown. So, it's not.
Yeah, I don't know. Kind of what you're saying makes me think of like the way that the pandemic affected how basically people went away from maybe thinking about exporting and just started refocusing on selling to their local communities. And same thing with people purchasing, instead of needing to
Hmm.
go to the grocery store and getting every little thing. They would be more interested in going to the small producers and supporting small farmers again. So I don't know, that
Definitely.
kind of made me think of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, I mean, I remember whenever I went right, I mean, do you remember when at the beginning of the pandemic, and you couldn't get pasta and you couldn't get rice
Yeah.
and flour was actually quite scarce. Yeast here was a major thing for some reason. But I remember going round to the farm shop and saying, have you got an issue with vegetables? And they're like, no, not in the slightest. So I sort of thought, well, if everything goes completely tits up, at least I'm going to have turnips and potatoes. And so I think that, and then they are definitely still as, I think they made a lot of customers during
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic that they've kept because to go back to that field that we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about earlier, those potatoes that you get, just you don't really need to do too much to them. And I think people realize now. I mean, even like just vegetables like a turnip. I love turnip. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I think it's super, and it's one of those things that you can do so
Mm-hmm.
much too. Like I remember getting the new Cafe Paradiso cookbook, and they put a wee turnip badge in it. Dennis loves turnips so much. I thought there's a man after my own heart.
I'm a turnip fan as well. I love turnips. Find all our episodes online at dyedgreen.com, and you can also visit us at bogandthunder.com. Now back to the show.
So I know that you actually left the country and you came to the United States for culinary school. Why'd you choose to leave Ireland for that and come to the US?
I didn't. I actually didn't choose, Kate. I was living in London and I was working in Langan's restaurant. And I decided that I wanted to work for Prue Leith. She had a Michelin starred restaurant at the time in Kensington Park Road. And I sort of thought, right, I want to go there. So I want to work there. So I went for a trial and they said, right, okay, went for a day's trial. You start Monday morning. So I thought, this is great. I went back to my apartment where I was staying in, and there was a letter from my mother. Now her phone had been cut off. There were a couple of people in the apartment living with us from Singapore. So I think they rang home quite a lot and then didn't pay the bill. So I got this letter from my mother, and on the back of it was, please open, it's good news. Because I would have normally taken a letter and thrown it in the bin because it was used invariably a lecture, sort your life out. So, and I rang her and I said, "Oh, I've got a job with Prue Leith," and she said, "Oh well, don't be worrying about Prue Leith. You've been offered this 3 month scholarship to Johnson and Wales in America." And I'm like, "Oh, but what about Prue Leith?" And she said, "Look, the hell with Prue Leith. She'll be there in 3 months' time. Just go to America." So I went to Johnson and Wales. It was a part of the International Fund for Ireland, and I think it was one of those cases where they had two spaces for students in the north, and they picked the two. I don't know. I don't know why they picked me. Probably because I could drink more than everybody else or some criteria like that. So I went over for 3 months, and I made a decision that I was going to throw myself into everything that was available for me. So the first thing the college said to us, you can join anything you want, even you're only here for 3 months. I joined everything. I joined the wine society, the ice tasting, the ice carving society. I joined everything. And then at the weekends they had open weekends, and they said, oh, if you want to volunteer, you can come and you can volunteer and you can help us at the weekend. We won't pay you, but it might be good. And actually, it was great because I worked in a different kitchen, so I might have been an Oriental kitchen or classic American, and I learned and I got friendly with the chef lecturers and helped out with them. And we know, and then in the evening they would take me home to their house and they would cook and maybe have a barbecue. So I was making relationships while the other Irish students were away visiting their relatives. I didn't have any relatives in America. They all did. So they spent the weekends then. And then at the end of the 3 months, the dean called me in and he said, look, we offer an international scholarship every year, and if you would, we would love you to accept it. So I said yes. And I remember one of the other Irish students, how did you get that? And I'm like, well, you know, when you were arsing around every weekend, I was working for the bloody college. So, so it was great. So I went back. I went home for a while. I went to London for a while and worked in different restaurants and did a bit, and then went back and did a couple of years back at Johnson Wales, which was an amazing experience. You know, I still have friends from there that, and you know, and there some of them are still involved in food, and it was just one of those once in a lifetime things, you know, that. And at that time, America was the college I went to. There were an awful lot of chefs from Europe, so you know you would have had classically trained chefs and from Europe, and then a few Americans, but mainly Austrian and French chefs. So you were really getting, for me, the college I went to in Belfast again was classic French, and then when I went to America, it was more or less the same, but they had different influences, and obviously Oriental kitchen was a big part of it as well. So it was a real learner for a couple of years. I learned a lot. You know, way sometimes you go to college and you don't learn anything, especially if you're working in a restaurant. Johnson Wales was different because they were running restaurants and they had chefs who'd come from industry and some were still in industry that were, and it was such a well thought of, you know, culinary school as well. It's
And
good.
then, how did you get first involved in TV? How did that come about?
So I have been doing bits and pieces of TV for years, just odds and ends. I did Ready Steady Cook, which is a show over here in England, you know, on BBC. About 20, I did that about, God, that must be about 24 years ago now. And then I was sort of doing bits and pieces of television, not mainly radio, to be honest with you. That was mainly radio. And every year a TV producer or a TV company would put an idea in for me. So this happened for about 20 years. I was thinking for a TV show, and it
Mm-hmm.
never happened. So ironically, I was too old when I was 35, but not when I was 55, because apparently it again had gone full circle. And some TV company that I work with now rang and said, "Oh, we were thinking of putting an idea in, all right, and for a TV show and a cooking show, and you would be the judge." And I'm like, "All right, whatever." But the editor of the BBC came back and said, "No, rather than doing this, could we just do a cooking show?" Just and I thought, and they come back to me, "How do you feel about that?" And I said, "God, I'd love that, you know." So the hook was it had to be Ulster Scots or Scotch Irish. The Scotch Irish Language Fund funded it or funded part of it. So it was sort of Scotch Irish. So then I sort of thought, well, this is the way I learned how to cook, you know, making soda farls and that kind of. And so we did things like that, but also, you know, using turnip. Did this dish in the first series, a turnip cake, which is basically layers and layers and layers, millions of layers of turnips, and you know, nice bits of pepper, and then layered with smoked Abernethy butter, and you pressed it after you baked it and sliced it up and fried it, and it had guanciale and things like that there. Um, so it was really just things like that, cooking things that we had here, like turnips, but giving them an edge. And then found this book, Florence Irwin, the
Oh, that's
cooking
so funny.
woman.
It's on my.
So
I was
Florence was,
going to ask you about her and that book, and if you,
yeah.
yeah.
So Florence, Florence, you know the way always a good book finds you, you never find a good book. And somebody had given me the book and said, I think you'd really like that. So we used it a lot in the TV series. We used it in all the series, and I think that book, because when you look at, I mean, Florence from the 1930s has recipes for pickled, you know, cured pickled nasturtium
Mm-hmm.
buds, and with kohlrabi, with different fish. And I mean, you know, it was a real book. Actually, I just found a first edition in a bookshop in Dublin that's hopefully coming here soon. So that's the other book that we found that actually Jess gave me, Jess Murphy, was an old WI cookbook called Ulster Fare. So Jess had found it in a bookshop in Galway, and she said, "I think you would like this book," and we used it in the second series. So so those things, when you go back and you look at things, like one of the recipes in it was in the WI cookbook was for semolina gnocchi, the way they make it
Mm-hmm.
in Rome. So I did that with soup leeks and a really nice sort of cheese from Northern Ireland, and baked it all. So it was like a sort of an Italian Ulster Scots dish. So, and that's the thing. And I think it's taking those ingredients, like, and like buttermilk and different cuts of meat, like, Jacob's ladder, and then pork griskins, which are a big thing here that nobody actually under the age of 60 eats, but actually they're a fantastic cut. And I remember my granny grew up in Leitrim, and she said when they killed the pig, the treat was these griskins. And it's like there's two griskins in every pig, and they sit beside the rib. And you get them here, they're cheap as chips. I'm nearly scared to mention them too much in case people start eating them, and then it goes the way of
Mm-hmm.
pork belly, So it's like, so I think that's the thing. And I think it's that whole nose to
Mm-hmm.
tail thing where you're, using cheaper cuts and using lots of vegetables. Because it's an Ulster Scots thing, I'm not using rice or anything like that there, but using spuds, using barley, you know, yeah. So it's season
Cool.
4 coming up now. Season 4. Yeah,
Congrats.
that's right. Which we're filming in
Yeah,
America.
I
So
do want to talk about that in a
yeah.
moment, but I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Ulster Scots cooking. And I'm just wondering, is it more, would you say that the traditions that or the foods that you're using are maybe more things that would be more local or more popularly used in the north as opposed to the south? And then I'm wondering, like I had joked
Yeah,
with you that Jess Murphy was like the first person who told me about you and your cooking, and she made a comment about how
yeah.
you made really delicious Protestant cakes, and I had never heard that expression before. And so I wanted to ask you what you thought that she might mean by that. And I'm wondering, is it a Victoria sponge or something like that? Is that, yeah, would that be something that would fall
No.
under the Ulster Scots cooking?
Yeah. She always says to me, when I see now, make sure you bring me Protestant Nordy cakes with you. So it's like, I think right. So in the probably more and not more in the Protestant tradition. I think because of maybe the temperance thing, which obviously missed my generation and the one behind it, there would be not. You would have tea and cake, and especially at a wake, we wouldn't have Protestants wouldn't have drink at a wake. Well, my family would, because we were all pissheads, apart from, but Presbyterian pissheads, which is But anyway, if you go to to a Catholic wake, it would be drink and singing and everything like that there. But we would be sitting in a corner, looking dour and eating lots of sugary buns and drinking tea. So I think there's that thing, but we would have a definitely more sweet things, and maybe not so much sponge, but things like so 15s. That's the big thing in the north. So it's a really sweet thing. It's just marshmallows, cherries, digestive biscuits, all done up with condensed milk. It's diabetes and a one single bite. The other thing that we do is a cheesecake. So a cheesecake in would be like a piece of you would make a pastry case, and then the mixture is like maybe some rice flour, egg white, almonds, and you could put a wee bit of jam in the bottom
Oh,
of
my
your pastry
grandmother used to
case,
make
and then
those.
fill it up with this lovely mix, and then you bake it. And those are really nice. It's like kind of this macaroni meringue thing on top. Apple creams, big thing. Again, baked pastry case, lovely stewed apple, and then lots of cream on top. Pineapple delights. That's basically cream. See the theme that's going here. Biscuit base, cream, lots of crushed pineapple, coconut, that kind of thing. So really, really sweet. Jammy Joey's, which is just basically a sponge cut up into squares and dipped in hot jam and rolled in coconut. So Australians call them lamingtons. We call them jammy joeys. Jess Murphy's favourite.
Good to know.
So, so I think that's the thing. I think there's that whole thing that it's tea and cake with us, and cakes, like, tray bakes, a fruit cake. And again, you'd slice the fruit cake up, lots and lots of butter, so
Mm-hmm.
that's what Jess meant. But I remember she wrote a thing about funerals, about Irish funerals, and there is a difference, and there is a regionality to Ireland and to cooking, and even within Northern Ireland there's regionality. And I think that's the thing. You always sort of think that Ireland as a food, it's one thing. But if you look at Boxty in the northwest of Ireland, like round Derry, Donegal, that boxty is a completely different recipe to one you'd get in Fermanagh. And then it's different again to Monaghan. And then it's different again in Cork. So there are different recipes. And I think that's something that we know that we probably need to explore more. But I mean, we're a relatively new food
Mm-hmm.
nation in Ireland, because I think we were kind of people at home, and maybe because of some things that happened socially, we weren't really. There's an awful lot of an association with spuds and with seaweed with poverty, and we were kind of looking away from that. But now there's a real celebration of spuds. There's a real celebration of seaweed. There's a celebration of salt cod, saltling. That's part of our tradition. But for a while there, we just wanted to cook, Italian things, and whereas we've got beautiful food here, really, really great produce, and thank God, there's lots of young chefs coming along now, and they've got great ideas. There's lots of young food producers and young farmers that are farming regeneratively. They want to actually act out on their
Mm-hmm.
ethics and the sustainability of everything. And there's cheesemakers, there's people making really good yogurt now that's coming straight from the farm, and we've got great charcuterie makers now that we wouldn't have had before. And again, using brilliant, really good rare breeds to do that. So, and fantastic butchers as well,
Yeah, I mean,
and butter makers.
you kind of just described like the last 40 episodes of our podcast. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
There's still like a real long list of people and topics that we haven't even gotten a chance to cover yet. So it's
No.
definitely a very exciting time, and I do think that probably even 10 or 5, 10, like certainly 20 years ago, it would have been very hard to find so many people celebrating Irish food in that way, in the way of being like,
There
this is what
wasn't,
we're
there
doing.
wasn't,
This is, we have this
yeah.
here, instead of like looking to France, looking to Italy for the so-called
Mhm.
good food or good quality cooking or whatever.
I think maybe now, maybe sometimes, and then this is going to be probably quite controversial, but you go to Italy, you go to France, it's still they make the same dishes. Whereas if you go to Cork or you go to Galway now, it's because there's so many people from different countries involved, and it's not so much traditional recipes, or it's really. I mean, I'm thinking of Kai restaurant. I'm thinking of Cafe Paradiso. You think of those restaurants, the food that's really regularly changing menus and really what
Hmm.
seasonally driven. Whereas I think sometimes you go to France and you go to Italy, and it's not really that seasonal, especially in the cities.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
it's
and
almost like
it's not really.
they're almost like, and part of this is what I guess it's part of what it means to have a food tradition, where things in those places don't change quite as much because they can't.
No,
Like even
they
legally,
don't
they can't
change.
really change these things. Whereas to
Yeah,
start up a cheese
exactly.
making or a organic veg producer in Ireland, you have a little bit more flexibility about what
But
it
even
means.
but even in countries where they have, certain food traditions, like back in the day, you could still only have those traditional foods during the season in which the produce,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was, meat or
That's right.
vegetables,
Yeah,
was available. And now
yeah.
you're seeing
Like
like artichokes were.
artichokes.
I don't actually know when I didn't do my research. I don't know when artichokes are in season in Rome, but they were certainly like everywhere I looked when I was there. And
I think Yeah, at that time of year, I think, from I would normally be in Italy about an hour from Rome, and I know that's big. And February is
Oh,
a big
okay. So
artichoke
we caught
season there,
the end
so
of it, maybe.
yeah, we just got right there. I mean, that stand that we saw in the Stiscio market was just with all the different types of artichoke.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
incredible. They survived in my
Oh,
Oh,
suitcase too,
nice.
nice.
Kate.
Good to know. Yeah, I didn't even think
Yeah.
to smuggle any back. So, you mentioned this in passing, and I know we talked a little bit about it in Rome, but you're getting ready to come to the United States to film a TV
Hmm.
series, and I think maybe many of our American listeners will know that there is a really that there are a lot of Ulster Scots people that live maybe mostly in the American South. Anybody that listens to
Yeah.
bluegrass knows the impact maybe of some of those immigrant communities on music. But it's my understanding that you're filming a series that follows the Appalachian Trail and explores the food traditions of some of those immigrant communities.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
We start off in Maine, and then we're going to work our way down to Tennessee. So it's really we've got a lot of there. I'm from a small townland, or quite a big townland actually, in Derry called Akadui. And during I think it was 1739, there was a boat that left full of Presbyterians that went, the whole congregation moved to New England, to Maine and New Hampshire because of persecution. So, because they were being persecuted for their religion, the same way that Catholic Church was. So the Reverend McGregor moved them all out there. At one stage, I think it was the last governor of Maine, her lineage went right back to people from that boat. So there is that big story there. And then with the food, they would have brought things over with them like buttermilk, that making butter and things like that. So that there's a whole big there's a lovely story about we're going to Belfast in Maine, we're going to Londonderry, New Hampshire, and then we've got things there that a lot of families that can trace their food producers, like an apple grower, and there's potatoes there that go back to the sort of that time, round about, I think it's the 1739. I haven't done my research, as you can tell. But anyway, that's trying to get my visa sorted. So I never thought at 57 years old I'd be looking for a work visa to go to America. But anyway, that happened yesterday. So it's going to be, and then we go to Tennessee. I mean, Nashville was founded by two Scotch-Irish men. So there's a whole, everybody knows the connection with the music, but there's so much of a connection with the food as well. But we're going to see somebody in New England as well that has artifacts and things like that from that boat. So I mean, it's a big, big story. It has been told before from a historical point of view, but not from a specifically food point of view, and the influence of the food from the settlers who came from Ulster. I mean, look, at the end of the day, what is it? 14 presidents can claim back Scotch-Irish heritage, so I think it's 14, it might be
I don't know.
15. Even Obama, look, Obama's Scotch-Irish. Look, Biden's Irish, but Barack Obama was apparently Scotch-Irish. There's Scotch-Irish
Who
in
knew?
there.
Interesting.
And we don't mention the one that was in after him,
Oh,
so.
no, no.
Oh,
Yeah, fingers crossed we don't have to experience that again.
oh, no. I would go beyond crossing
Yeah,
my
I was gonna
fingers.
say whatever's next.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
whatever's past
We'll
that.
move swiftly on because that could take
Yeah,
up me
yeah,
in another
absolutely.
3
Well, you'll
hours of a
find us,
podcast.
we
Yeah.
might be your neighbors in a few.
Yeah, I think I would. Yes, I don't. I wouldn't blame you, Kate. Plenty of
Yeah,
land around
yeah,
us.
absolutely. Yeah, well,
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because that's been like sort of, I'm been really interested in that side of things, I suppose, with studying in America and I love America. I mean, the minute I arrived in America the first time when I was 19, sort of thought, gosh, that feeling you have of maybe coming home a wee bit. And I did love living in America. It was just, you know, it was such a brilliant time in my life as well. So kind of, you know, went a wee bit tits up when I come home for a while. But anyway, I'm going back on track quite
Yeah.
quickly.
I feel
But
the same way
you know,
about coming to
but I
Ireland.
do
So
think,
yeah.
yeah, you know, and I think that's the thing. It's where you're happy. You know, it's not you know, but the world's so small now. You know, and it's like it's so small, and the food community is so small. I mean, you know, we're walking down the street in Rome and bumping into people. You know, I know there was a conference on, but it's just, you know, everybody knows everybody. And you know, so but normally everybody says, "Do you know Jess
Yeah.
Murphy?" When you know, if you come from if somebody says somebody's American or whatever, do you know just Jess Murphy? Oh yeah, I know Jess. Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
did.
So everybody assumes everybody knows everybody else, but actually we probably do in Ireland. You
Yeah,
know,
we've had
so
that. We've had that
you know,
experience being over there, like finding that someone is like somebody's sister or brother or partner or something.
but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it. That's it.
that's great.
Yeah. The only other New Zealand people that I know here are own a bar in Portrush, and Jess like, oh yeah, Chris, he's my cousin. I'm like, Jesus.
Amazing. Yeah. Um,
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
yeah.
Oh, listen, thank you for having me, and it's lovely to talk to you, and lovely to meet you, Max, and lovely to see. And next time you're in Ireland, you'll have to come up
Oh
to the
yeah,
north,
absolutely.
and I'll make you some of those lovely
Breakfast and
Nordic
cakes. Yeah,
Protestant.
yeah.
I want
My
some of those turnip. I want some turnip
but we'll have
tops.
whiskey
I have
with
one more.
them.
Turnip
Yeah,
tops
my
with garlic.
So my dad.
I would definitely. I'll send you a photograph
Yeah.
of when I've cooked them tonight.
I have a
but
question.
I just got very, very excited. I think there's something probably wrong with me that I get a bag of turnip tops and I feel my heart racing a wee bit.
Very good.
My grandmother, she and my aunt used to bake all the time. So like she would have made those little cheesecake things that you were talking about. She called them cheesecakes, but I wouldn't. As an American, I wouldn't consider them to be
No.
cheesecakes. Yeah,
There's no
yeah, with the
cheese on
jam
them,
on the bottom.
Sid.
Yeah, it was so. I always thought that was so
No,
weird, but I never thought to ask about it. But there is this one
Yeah.
dessert that she used to make that I've asked a few people we've interviewed about, and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So, have you ever heard of anything called megarish?
No.
It's like it was basically this stuff.
No.
My brother and sister used to love it, and I would never eat it because I'm not like a fruitcake fan. But it was basically like kind of like
right.
like a dense, sort of chewy fruitcake, but then it had like pastry wrapped around it, like a pastry crust.
Oh, sounds.
Um,
How do you spell that?
I
Kate?
actually have no idea. But I would probably
Right, I'll write
like
it down,
I would
and that's going to
yeah
be my.
Megarish. That's just like phonetic.
That's the way I
phonetic.
spelled
Okay,
it.
yeah,
there.
megarish. So.
Yeah. And where and who
My
made that?
grandmother,
Your
yeah,
grandma
she's
made
also
that?
from Tullamore.
Tullamore, so it must be. Yeah, but I'll ask around definitely. But I mean, it sounds great.
Yeah, if you like fruit, yeah,
Fruitcake
if you,
and
I mean, if
pastry.
you're into fruitcake,
What's not to
well,
love?
yeah, but they have also like, they used to do the fruitcake where you put plenty of booze in it, and then you put it up on a shelf somewhere, and there would be like,
That's right.
we would find some of those things like years later. They would like forget where they put them or something like that. Yeah,
They'd
yeah.
still have been fine
That's
too.
the thing, yeah.
I mean, people used to eat their wedding cake after, on their 10th anniversary and things like that because there's so much alcohol
It's
in it.
kind of like that Irish,
Kind of
that
preserves
Irish
it.
version of the tradition of like making kimchi and like digging a hole in the ground and burying it or something. It's like the fruit cake that lives
Bog
forever.
butter.
Yeah,
Bog butter. Yeah.
great. Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the
Oh,
time.
you're lovely to talk to you both. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
me.
can't wait to see the next episodes, and maybe we'll meet up. Maybe we'll meet up
Oh,
here.
yeah,
Who knows,
thank
right?
On the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Okay.
I'll be the one wearing the big bear, the big
Nice.
hat. What are they called? Those hats that David Crockett
Oh, the,
wore
With
with
the, oh
the
yeah,
flaps.
the coonskin caps.
Yeah.
Yeah, the raccoon. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Raccoon
Yeah.
hat. Yeah, I'm going to get one
Yeah.
of those. That's going to be my trademark from now on. Running around with a trademark, making me
Yeah,
jammy joeys with a raccoon
no one's ever.
hat on.
I've never seen a chef.
If you're
wearing
trying to
that
go
before,
viral
so.
on TikTok, that seems like a really good thing. No one's doing that yet.
Yeah.
Totally.
No, I'm
Yeah.
going to do it, Max. I'm going to be wearing the raccoon hat. While I make
Magarish, yeah.
magarish cake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Dyed Green is a project of Bog and Thunder, whose mission is to highlight the best of Irish food and culture through food tours, events, and media. Find out more at www.bogandthunder.com. If you have anything to say or to suggest people we should speak with, you can send us an email at hello@bogandthunder.com.